The morning sun barely broke through the thick clouds hanging over the small town of Ridgemont, Texas. It was one of those gray September mornings where the air felt heavy with the promise of rain that never quite arrived. Main Street was already alive with the rumble of engines and the smell of gasoline mixing with fresh coffee from the diner across the road. Sarah Mitchell stood on the sidewalk outside Pete's auto shop, her arms wrapped tightly around her 9-month-old daughter, Emma. The baby was bundled in a worn yellow blanket, the same one Sarah had used since leaving the hospital nearly a year ago. Emma's big brown eyes stared out at the world with innocent curiosity, occasionally reaching her tiny fingers toward the motorcycles lined up in front of the shop. There were at least 15 bikes parked there, chrome gleaming even under the overcast sky. Their owners stood in clusters, leather jackets creaking as they moved, voices rough but friendly as they joked and planned their weekend ride. The Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club had made Pete's their regular morning stop every Saturday for the past 3 years. Sarah swallowed hard and shifted Emma's weight on her hip. The baby was getting heavier every day, and Sarah's thin arms trembled slightly from exhaustion. She had been up since 4 in the morning, walking the 3 miles from the motel on the edge of town where she and Emma had been staying for the past 2 weeks. Before that, it had been her car. Before that, a friend's couch. Before that, a life she barely recognized anymore. She watched the bikers laugh and slap each other on the back, their boots heavy on the pavement. These were not the kind of men Sarah would have approached 6 months ago. Back then, she had been different. Back then, she had a job, an apartment, a plan. Back then, she had believed that hard work and good intentions were enough to keep your head above water. But life had taught her otherwise. The eviction notice had come first, just 2 weeks after Emma was born. Then the car broke down. Then her phone got shut off. Then the temporary job at the grocery store ended when they said they could not keep her on full-time. Each blow had come faster than the last, until Sarah found herself standing here, homeless and desperate, holding her baby and trying to figure out how to make it through another day. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her sneakers were held together with duct tape, and her jeans had holes in the knees that were not fashionable but functional, worn through from kneeling on hard floors. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face, though young at 24, already carried the weight of someone much older. The bikers did not notice her at first. They were too caught up in their conversation, something about a ride through the hill country next weekend. Sarah cleared her throat, but the sound was lost in the rumble of an engine starting up nearby. She tried again, louder this time. "Excuse me." One of the men turned. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a gray beard that reached the middle of his chest and eyes that looked like they had seen more miles than most people ever would. His leather vest was covered in patches, and a bandana kept his long hair out of his face. His name was Marcus, though Sarah did not know that yet. Marcus looked down at her, then at the baby in her arms. His expression shifted from surprise to something softer, though his voice remained gruff when he spoke. "Yeah, sweetheart. What do you need?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to keep talking. Emma squirmed in her arms, letting out a small coo that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the group. "I was wondering if maybe I could wash your bikes. All of them. For money. I have soap and rags and I can do a really good job. I used to detail cars back in Austin before I moved here." The words tumbled out faster than she intended, desperation making her voice shake. She hated how weak she sounded, how pathetic. But pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The other bikers had turned now, a dozen pairs of eyes fixed on her. Some looked curious. Some looked skeptical. One man in the back muttered something to his friend that Sarah could not hear, but she saw the way his lip curled and knew it was not kind. Marcus studied her for a long moment. His gaze moved from her face to Emma, then down to her taped-together shoes and back up again. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than before. "Where are you from, girl?" Sarah hesitated. She did not want to tell her story. She did not want pity. She just wanted work. But something in Marcus's eyes made her think that lying would be worse than the truth. "Austin originally. But we have been here in Ridgemont for a couple weeks now. Just me and Emma. My daughter." She bounced the baby gently, and Emma reached out toward Marcus with a gummy smile. Despite himself, the big biker's face softened even more. He reached out one rough, tattooed finger, and Emma grabbed it with surprising strength. How old? 9 months. And where is your family? Your people? Sarah looked down at the ground. This was the part she hated. The part that made her feel like she had failed at something fundamental. It is just us. Emma's father left before she was born. My mom passed away 3 years ago. I do not have anyone else. The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah could feel the weight of judgment, the assumptions these men were making about her. Single mother. Homeless. Probably made bad choices. Probably deserved whatever situation she was in. She had heard it all before. Seen it in the eyes of social workers and church volunteers and strangers on the street. But when she looked up at Marcus, she did not see judgment. She saw something else. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. How much you charging? Sarah's heart leaped. $10 per bike. I will make them shine like new. Promise. $10 meant she could buy diapers and a few cans of formula. $10 times 15 bikes meant she could pay for another night at the motel and maybe even get a hot meal. It was not much, but it was everything. Marcus turned to the other bikers. What do you boys say? Should we give this young lady some work? A man with a thick red beard spoke up, his voice skeptical. How do we know she ain't gonna scratch the paint or mess something up? These bikes are expensive, man. Another biker, younger with sleeve tattoos covering both arms, shrugged. It is just soap and water, Jake. What is she gonna do? Hurt it with kindness. A few of the men chuckled at that, and Sarah felt a small flicker of hope. But then the man named Jake crossed his arms and shook his head. I do not know, Marcus. Seems like we would be encouraging the wrong thing here. Maybe she should go to a shelter or call social services or something. This ain't our problem. Sarah felt her face flush hot with shame. Emma started to fuss, sensing her mother's tension, and Sarah bounced her automatically while trying to keep her voice steady. I am not asking for charity. I am asking for work. I am willing to earn it. Marcus held up a hand, silencing the group. He stepped closer to Sarah, close enough that she could smell motor oil and leather and cigarette smoke. When he spoke, it was quiet enough that only she could hear. You got somewhere safe to stay tonight? Sarah nodded quickly, not wanting to admit that safe was a relative term. The motel was not dangerous exactly, but it was not the kind of place you wanted to raise a baby either. Yeah. We are fine. Marcus did not look convinced, but he did not push. Instead, he stepped back and raised his voice so the whole group could hear. All right, here is the deal. You wash every bike here, do a good job, and we will each pay you $10. That is $150 total. But if you do a half job or leave streaks or miss spots, you do not get nothing. Fair. Sarah nodded so hard she thought her neck might snap. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. You will not regret this, I promise. Marcus jerked his chin toward the side of the building where a hose was coiled against the wall. There is water over there. Pete inside will let you use the soap and supplies. Get started whenever you are ready. Sarah hurried toward the building, Emma still balanced on her hip. Her hands were already shaking with a mixture of relief and nervous energy. This was her chance. She could not mess it up. Inside the auto shop, Pete looked up from the counter where he was sorting receipts. He was a short, stocky man in his 60s with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails and a baseball cap that advertised a brand of motor oil. When he saw Sarah, his eyebrows rose. Marcus send you in here? Yes, sir. He said I could use some soap and supplies to wash the bikes outside. Pete grunted and jerked his thumb toward a supply closet in the back. Help yourself. Just do not make a mess. Sarah thanked him and quickly gathered what she needed. A bucket, several clean rags, a bottle of bike-safe soap, and a soft brush for the hard-to-reach spots. Emma watched everything with wide eyes, occasionally babbling in her own language that only she understood. Back outside, Sarah set up her station next to the hose. She carefully laid Emma down on the yellow blanket on a patch of grass where she could keep an eye on her. The baby immediately grabbed her toes and started chewing on them, content for the moment. Sarah turned on the hose and got to work. The first bike Sarah approached was a massive black and chrome Harley-Davidson that looked like it cost more than she had made in the past year. She ran her hand over the fuel tank gently, feeling the smooth paint under her fingertips. She could not afford to make a single mistake. She filled the bucket with soapy water and began working methodically, starting from the top and moving down. The work was familiar, almost meditative. Back in Austin, she had spent 2 summers detailing cars at a luxury dealership. She had been good at it too, good enough that the owner had promised her a permanent position. But then her mom got sick, and Sarah had to leave to take care of her. By the time her mom passed, the job was gone. The bikers had moved inside Pete's shop, their voices carrying through the open door as they drank coffee and talked. Sarah was grateful for the space. It meant fewer eyes watching her, less pressure. Just her, the bikes, and the rhythmic motion of washing and rinsing. Emma stayed remarkably calm on her blanket, entertained by a plastic ring toy that Sarah had found in a donation box outside a church last week. Every few minutes, Sarah would glance over to make sure her daughter was okay, her heart clenching with a mixture of love and guilt so intense it sometimes made it hard to breathe. She finished the first bike in 20 minutes, stepping back to inspect her work. The chrome gleamed like a mirror, every inch of dirt and road grime removed. She moved to the second bike, then the third, falling into a steady rhythm. By the time she reached the 5th bike, her back was starting to ache and her hands were raw from the soap and scrubbing. But she pushed through, determined to earn every dollar they had promised her. That was when Jake came back outside. He was the one with the red beard, the one who had questioned whether Sarah should be doing this at all. He walked over to the bikes she had already finished, running his hand over the chrome and inspecting them with narrowed eyes. Sarah's stomach tightened with anxiety. Jake moved from bike to bike, saying nothing. Finally, he turned to Sarah with a frown. "You missed a spot here." He pointed to a section near the rear fender. Sarah immediately dropped what she was doing and hurried over, rag in hand. She looked where he was pointing but could not see anything. The chrome was spotless. "Where exactly?" Jake smirked. "Right there. You blind or something?" Sarah looked again, squinting in the sunlight that had finally broken through the clouds. There was nothing there. No dirt, no streaks, no water spots. The bike was immaculate. "Sir, I really do not see what you are talking about. Could you point it out more specifically?" Jake's smirk widened into something uglier. "Maybe you are just not as good at this as you thought. Maybe Marcus made a mistake hiring some desperate homeless girl to touch our bikes." The words hit Sarah like a slap. She felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed this money. She could not afford to lose her temper, no matter how much she wanted to tell this man exactly what she thought of him. "I will rewash it. No problem." She turned back to the bike and went over it again, even though she knew it did not need it. When she finished, Jake inspected it again and shrugged. "I guess that is better. But you better make sure the rest are perfect, or we ain't paying you nothing." He walked away, and Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. Emma started to fuss then, her small cries cutting through the air. Sarah quickly rinsed her hands and hurried over to pick up her daughter. The baby was hungry, her little face scrunched up in displeasure. Sarah glanced around, looking for somewhere private to feed her, but there was nowhere. The shop was full of men, and the street was busy with Saturday morning traffic. She sat down on the curb, turning her back to the shop as much as possible, and awkwardly positioned Emma to nurse under her shirt. Her face burned with embarrassment, but what choice did she have? Emma needed to eat. From inside the shop, she heard laughter. Male voices talking about something she could not quite make out. Then Jake's voice rose above the others. "I am telling you, this is exactly what is wrong with this country. People making bad decisions and then expecting everyone else to bail them out. She probably has another baby daddy somewhere, living off welfare while we work our asses off." Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Her hands trembled as she held Emma, who was now nursing contentedly, completely unaware of the cruelty being directed at her mother. Another voice chimed in, one Sarah did not recognize. I do not know, man. She seems like she is trying. At least she asked for work instead of just begging. Yeah, but how did she end up in this situation in the first place? Jake continued. Nobody ends up homeless with a baby unless they made some seriously bad choices. Probably drugs or partying or who knows what. And now we are supposed to feel sorry for her. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the words. But they kept coming, each one a fresh wound. I am just saying we work hard for our money. We should not have to feel guilty because some girl could not keep her life together. Marcus's voice cut through then, sharp and commanding. That is enough, Jake. The conversation inside went quiet, but the damage was done. Sarah felt hollow, carved out from the inside. Every fear she had about herself, every terrible thought that kept her awake at night, had just been spoken aloud for everyone to hear. Maybe Jake was right. Maybe she had made bad choices. Maybe she deserved to be here, struggling and desperate and alone. Emma finished nursing and looked up at her mother with those big, trusting brown eyes. Sarah wiped at her own eyes quickly, not wanting her daughter to see her cry. Emma did not deserve this. Whatever mistakes Sarah had made, her daughter was innocent, pure, perfect, and Sarah would do whatever it took to give her a better life. She settled Emma back on the blanket with her toy and returned to the bikes. Her hands moved automatically now, washing and rinsing and drying. She did not let herself think about Jake's words. She did not let herself feel the humiliation burning in her chest. She just worked. By noon, she had finished 10 bikes. Her arms felt like they might fall off, and her knees ached from kneeling on the concrete. The sun was fully out now, beating down on her shoulders and making sweat run down her back. She had not eaten since yesterday afternoon, and her head was starting to feel light and dizzy, but she kept going. The bikers came back outside around 12:30, stomping out of the shop with full bellies and renewed energy. They were planning their afternoon ride, discussing routes and stops. Sarah stayed focused on her work, trying to be invisible. Marcus walked over to inspect the bikes. He moved slowly, carefully, running his hands over each one. When he reached the bike Sarah had already finished, he nodded approvingly. Good work. Sarah managed a small smile. Thank you. Jake wandered over, arms crossed over his chest. He looked at the bikes, then at Sarah, then back at the bikes. His expression was skeptical. I still think that fifth one could use another pass. Marcus turned to look at him, and something in his gaze made Jake take a step back. The bikes are clean, Jake. Let it go. But the damage was already done. Sarah felt like she was under a microscope, every move scrutinized and judged. She worked faster on the remaining bikes, desperate to finish and get away from here. By 2 o'clock, all 15 bikes gleamed in the afternoon sun. Sarah's hands were cracked and bleeding in places from the constant exposure to soap and water. Her back screamed in protest every time she bent down. But it was done. She stood up slowly, pressing a hand to her lower back, and looked at Marcus. All finished. Would you like to inspect them? Marcus walked down the line of motorcycles, taking his time. The other bikers watched, some with genuine interest, others with barely concealed skepticism. When Marcus finished his inspection, he turned to the group. She did a damn fine job. Best wash these bikes have had in months. Relief flooded through Sarah so intensely she thought her legs might give out. Marcus pulled out his wallet and counted out 10 $20 bills, handing them to Sarah. That is 200. The extra 50 is because you did better work than we expected. Sarah stared at the money in her hands, unable to speak. $200. It was more money than she had held at one time in months. With this, she could afford the motel for almost a week. She could buy diapers and formula and maybe even some real food. Thank you. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. You got someplace safe to stay tonight? The question again. Sarah nodded quickly, clutching the money to her chest. Yes, sir. We will be fine. Marcus did not look convinced, but he did not push. The other bikers started counting out their money too, most of them handing Sarah $10 as promised. A few gave her 15 or 20, not meeting her eyes as they did. When she got to Jake, He pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and tossed it at her feet. "That is all I think it is worth." Sarah stared at the money on the ground, humiliation burning through her like acid. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the $5 bill lying on the cracked pavement at her feet. The world seemed to narrow to just that moment. The crumpled money, Jake's smirk, the heavy silence that had fallen over the group. She could feel every eye on her, waiting to see what she would do. Would she bend down and pick it up, accepting the humiliation? Would she cry? Would she fight back? Emma made a small cooing sound from her blanket, and that tiny noise pulled Sarah back to reality. She had her daughter to think about. Pride was expensive, and she could not afford it. She bent down slowly, her knees protesting, and picked up the $5 bill. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket with the rest of the money, then looked Jake directly in the eye. "Thank you for your contribution." Her voice was steady, devoid of emotion. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Jake's smirk faltered slightly, as if he had expected more of a reaction. Before he could say anything else, Marcus stepped between them. "Get out of here, Jake. Now." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but something in Marcus's expression made him think better of it. He shrugged and walked toward his bike, muttering something under his breath that Sarah chose not to hear. The other bikers began to disperse, climbing onto their motorcycles and starting their engines. The rumble filled the air, drowning out everything else. One by one, they pulled out of the parking lot and headed down Main Street, their engines roaring like thunder. Soon only Marcus remained. He stood there for a long moment, hands in his pockets, looking at Sarah with an expression she could not quite read. Finally, he spoke. "How much money you got now? Total?" Sarah hesitated, then pulled out the bills and counted them quickly. $205. Marcus nodded slowly. "That is enough for what, maybe a week at that motel on Route 9. Sarah's stomach dropped. How did he know where she was staying? "I have been around long enough to recognize someone who is barely hanging on. That motel is the only place in town that does not ask questions and takes cash by the day." Sarah felt exposed, like all her carefully constructed defenses had been stripped away. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the afternoon heat. "We will be okay. I will find more work. I always do." Marcus pulled out his wallet again and handed her another $100 bill. Sarah's eyes widened. "I cannot take that. I did not earn it. Consider it an investment. There is a woman named Linda who runs a diner about 2 blocks from here, Thompson's Family Restaurant. She has been looking for someone to help with the breakfast and lunch rush. I will call her tonight and tell her you are coming by tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock sharp." Sarah felt tears welling up again, but this time they were different. Not tears of humiliation or despair, but something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Why are you doing this? You do not even know me." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. 20 years ago, I was you. Not exactly, but close enough. Lost my job, lost my house, lost everything except my bike and my pride. And my pride nearly killed me. A stranger gave me a chance when nobody else would, and it saved my life. Maybe I am just paying it forward." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at her. "Jake is an idiot, but he is not wrong about one thing. You did make choices that got you here. We all do. But what matters now is what you choose next. You can stay stuck in this moment, or you can fight your way out of it. That is up to you." With that, he climbed onto his motorcycle and rode off, leaving Sarah standing in the empty parking lot with Emma. $305, and the first real chance she had been given in months. Sarah sank down onto the curb, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and emotion. Emma crawled over to her, pulling herself up using Sarah's leg for support. The baby looked up at her mother and smiled, showing her 2 tiny bottom teeth. Sarah pulled her daughter into her arms and held her tight, breathing in that sweet baby smell that somehow made everything feel bearable. "We are going to be okay, baby girl. I promise you we are going to be okay." That night, Sarah used some of the money to buy real groceries for the first time in weeks. bread, peanut butter, bananas, a gallon of milk, diapers, and formula. She also bought Emma a small stuffed elephant from the dollar store. It was not much, but when Emma squeezed it and laughed with pure delight, it felt like the most important purchase Sarah had ever made. Back at the motel, she gave Emma a proper bath in the small sink, using the last of the travel-sized baby shampoo she had been rationing for weeks. She dressed her daughter in the cleanest onesie she had, then made herself a peanut butter sandwich and ate it slowly, savoring every bite. After Emma fell asleep in the middle of the sagging mattress, surrounded by pillows to keep her from rolling off, Sarah sat at the small table by the window and counted her money again. $305. It was not a fortune, but it was a start. She thought about Marcus and his words. You did make choices that got you here. He was right, of course. She had chosen to trust Emma's father when he said he would stay. She had chosen to spend her savings on her mother's medical bills instead of keeping an emergency fund. She had chosen to move to Ridgemont because the rent was cheaper, not knowing that jobs were scarce and opportunities even scarcer. But she had also chosen to keep fighting. She had chosen to ask for work instead of giving up. She had chosen to swallow her pride and pick up that $5 bill because her daughter's needs were more important than her ego. And tomorrow, she would choose to show up at that diner and prove that she deserved this chance. Sarah pulled out the small notebook she kept in her bag and began making a list. Things she needed to do, goals she needed to reach, steps she needed to take. It was the first time in months that she had allowed herself to think beyond just surviving the next 24 hours. The next morning, Sarah woke up before dawn. She used the motel's shared shower to wash her hair properly for the first time in over a week, standing under the hot water until the small water heater ran cold. She put on her least worn pair of jeans and a clean black t-shirt, brushing her hair until it shone and pulling it back into a neat ponytail. Emma was cranky from being woken up early, but Sarah fed her and changed her and packed their few belongings into the diaper bag with practiced efficiency. By 8:30, they were walking down Main Street toward Thompson's Family Restaurant. The diner was a classic American establishment, all chrome and red vinyl booths, with a neon sign in the window that advertised the best coffee in Ridgemont. Through the large front windows, Sarah could see it was already busy with the Sunday morning crowd. She stood outside for a moment, gathering her courage. Emma babbled happily on her hip, reaching toward the window where she could see people eating. Okay, baby, this is it. Mama is going to get a job and everything is going to get better. She pushed open the door, and a bell chimed overhead. The smell of coffee and bacon and fresh biscuits hit her immediately, making her mouth water and her stomach growl. A few customers looked up briefly before returning to their meals and conversations. Behind the counter, a woman in her late 50s with gray-streaked hair and laugh lines around her eyes looked up from pouring coffee. She wore a name tag that said Linda and an expression that was equal parts exhausted and kind. "Help you, honey?" Sarah walked up to the counter, adjusting Emma on her hip. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Sarah Mitchell. Marcus from the Iron Brotherhood said he might call you about me." Linda's face brightened immediately. "Oh yes, Marcus called last night. Said you were a hard worker and that I should give you a shot." She set down the coffee pot and came around the counter, looking at Sarah and then at Emma with a thoughtful expression. "You got childcare lined up?" Sarah's heart sank. This was always the problem. She shook her head slowly. "No, ma'am, not yet. But Emma is a good baby. She does not cry much, and I can work fast, I promise." Linda studied them both for a long moment, and Sarah held her breath. This was it. This was the moment where she would either get turned away again or finally catch a break. If you're rooting for Sarah and Emma right now, if you want to see what happens next, take a moment and hit that subscribe button. Because this story is about to take a turn that nobody saw coming. Linda tapped her fingers on the counter, thinking. Then she sighed and shook her head, but she was smiling. "Against my better judgment, I am going to give you a chance. You can bring the baby with you for now. I have a playpen in the back office that my granddaughter used to use when she was little. Emma can stay back there where you can see her through the window. We will figure out something more permanent once you get on your feet." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. She clutched Emma tighter, barely able to speak. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I will not let you down, I swear. Sarah started working at Thompson's family restaurant the very next morning. Linda gave her a simple uniform, black pants, and a white button-up shirt with the diner's logo embroidered on the pocket. It was the first new piece of clothing Sarah had received in over a year, and she treated it like it was made of gold. The work was hard. Breakfast shift started at 5 in the morning, which meant Sarah had to wake up at 4 to get herself and Emma ready. She would pack bottles, diapers, and toys into the diaper bag, then make the 20-minute walk to the diner through the dark, quiet streets of Ridgemont. Linda kept her word about the playpen. Emma would sit in the back office, surrounded by toys that Linda had brought from home, while Sarah worked the floor. During slow moments, Sarah would duck back to check on her daughter, change her diaper, or give her a bottle. Emma seemed to thrive on the routine, her personality blooming as she grew more comfortable in the space. The customers at Thompson's were a mix of regulars and travelers passing through. Truck drivers, construction workers, retirees who came in for the early bird special, families on road trips. Sarah learned their names, remembered their orders, and worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. Tips were decent. Not amazing, but decent. Combined with her hourly wage, Sarah was making just enough to move out of the motel and into a small efficiency apartment above the hardware store on 3rd Street. It was not much: one room with a kitchenette, a bathroom the size of a closet, and windows that rattled when the wind blew. But it was theirs. For the first time in almost a year, Sarah had an address. Place to call home. She bought a used crib from a thrift store and set it up in the corner of the room. She found a small table and 2 chairs on the curb outside someone's house with a free sign. She slowly pieced together a life from scraps and second-hand items, and it felt like building a palace. The bikers from the Iron Brotherhood became regular customers at the diner. Every Saturday morning, they would roll in around 8 o'clock, filling half the restaurant with their noise and laughter. Marcus always sat at the counter ordering black coffee and the truck driver special: 3 eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast. He never said much to Sarah beyond his order, but there was an understanding between them, a mutual respect. He had given her a chance, and she was proving she deserved it. Jake came in with the group too, though he never ordered from Sarah directly. He would wait until one of the other waitresses was available, pointedly ignoring Sarah when she approached his table. She did not let it bother her. She had more important things to focus on. Weeks turned into months. Emma learned to crawl, then to pull herself up on furniture, then to take her first wobbly steps while holding on to the edge of the playpen. Linda and the other staff at the diner celebrated each milestone like Emma was their own, bringing in cupcakes and taking pictures. Sarah started to feel something she had not felt in a long time. Stability. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the absence of constant fear. She could pay her rent. She could buy groceries. She could afford diapers without having to choose between that and eating. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was better than where she had been. Then, one Saturday morning in late November, everything changed. The diner was packed, every booth and table filled with the usual weekend crowd. Sarah was in the middle of taking an order when she heard raised voices coming from the corner booth. She glanced over and saw Jake standing, his face red with anger, pointing at something on his plate. "This is raw. The egg is completely raw. What kind of place is this?" Linda hurried over, her face apologetic. "I am so sorry, sir. Let me get you a fresh plate right away." Jake shoved the plate toward her, and it slid off the table, crashing to the floor and shattering. The entire diner went quiet. "I am not paying for this garbage. This place has gone downhill ever since you started hiring trash off the street." His eyes cut toward Sarah, and she felt her face burn. She knew he was talking about her. Linda's expression hardened. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to lower your voice. We will remake your order, but you need to calm down. I will calm down when you stop running this place like a charity case. You got homeless people handling food, babies crying in the back, and service that is slower than molasses. It is pathetic." Marcus stood up from the counter, his movement slow and deliberate. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. "Jake, outside, now." Jake turned to face him, And for a moment, Sarah thought there might be a fight right there in the middle of Thompson's family restaurant. But something in Marcus's expression made Jake think better of it. He grabbed his jacket and stormed toward the door, Marcus following close behind. Through the front windows, Sarah could see them in the parking lot. Marcus was talking, his body language aggressive, pointing back toward the diner. Jake was arguing back, his arms crossed defensively. The conversation lasted several minutes, growing more heated with each exchange. Finally, Marcus grabbed Jake by the front of his shirt and said something directly into his face. Jake's expression shifted from anger to shock to something that looked almost like shame. He pulled away from Marcus, climbed onto his motorcycle, and rode off without another word. Marcus stood in the parking lot for a moment longer, his shoulders tense, before coming back inside. The diner was still quiet, everyone watching. He walked straight to the counter where Sarah was standing and pulled out his wallet. "Let me pay for Jake's breakfast. And for the plate he broke." Linda waved him off. "You do not need to do that, Marcus." "Yeah, I do." He was out of line. Way out of line. He handed Linda a $50 bill, then turned to Sarah. His expression was serious, almost sad. "I am sorry about that." "About him?" Sarah shook her head quickly. "You do not have to apologize for him. You are not responsible for what he says. Maybe not. But I brought you into this world, and he is part of it. That makes it my responsibility." He turned to leave, then paused. "You are doing real good, Sarah. I hope you know that. What you have built here, what you are doing for your kid, that takes guts. Do not let people like Jake make you forget that." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." After Marcus left, the diner slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed, orders were placed, and life went on. But something had shifted. The other customers, many of whom had witnessed the entire exchange, started treating Sarah differently. An older woman at one of the booths called her over and handed her an extra $20 tip. A construction worker left a note on his receipt that said, "Keep fighting, Mama. You are doing great." Even the cook, a grumpy man in his 60s who rarely spoke to anyone, nodded at her with something that looked like respect when she came back to pick up an order. That evening, after her shift ended and Emma was asleep in her crib, Sarah sat at her small table and looked around her tiny apartment. The walls were bare except for a calendar she had gotten free from the hardware store. The furniture was mismatched and worn, but it was clean, it was safe, and it was theirs. She pulled out her notebook and looked at the list she had made that first night after washing the motorcycles. Some of the items were checked off now. Get a job. Find a place to live. Buy Emma proper clothes. But there were still so many left undone. Save money. Get a car. Find better childcare. Build a real future. Sarah added a new item to the list. Do not let anyone make you feel small. The next few weeks passed quickly. Thanksgiving came and went. Linda invited Sarah and Emma to her house for dinner, and Sarah met Linda's family. 3 grown children, 2 grandchildren, and a husband who told terrible jokes and made everyone laugh. It was the first real holiday Sarah had celebrated since her mother died, and she cried in the bathroom twice from the overwhelming feeling of being included. December arrived with cold winds and the promise of snow. The diner put up Christmas decorations, and Linda taught Sarah how to make the special holiday pies they served every year. Emma turned 1 year old, and the entire diner staff threw her a small party during the afternoon lull, complete with a homemade cake and a stuffed animal that Emma clutched to her chest for days afterward. Then, 2 days before Christmas, Marcus came into the diner alone. No other bikers, no group ride, just him. He sat at the counter and ordered his usual coffee. But something was different. He seemed nervous, which was unusual for a man who always seemed so self-assured. "Sarah, got a minute?" She glanced around. The diner was slow, just a few tables occupied. "Sure. What is up?" Marcus pulled an envelope out of his jacket and slid it across the counter. Inside was a check for $5,000. Sarah stared at it, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. "What is this?" Marcus cleared his throat. "The club took a vote. We want to help you get a car. A reliable one. Not some piece of junk that will break down in 3 months. That should be enough for a down payment on something decent, maybe even enough to buy something outright if you are smart about it. Sarah shook her head, pushing the envelope back toward him. I cannot accept this. This is too much. It is not charity. Consider it a loan if that makes you feel better. Pay us back when you are on your feet. Or do not. Either way, you need a car. You have been walking to work in the dark for months now, carrying a baby. That is not safe and it is not sustainable. Take the money. Sarah looked down at the check again, then back at Marcus. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because watching you fight reminds me why I fought. Because you did not give up when most people would have. And because that little girl deserves a mama who has a fighting chance. Take the money, Sarah. Let us help you. Sarah stood in the used car lot on the outskirts of Ridgemont, Emma on her hip, staring at a silver Honda Civic that looked like it had been well maintained despite its age. The salesman, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile, was explaining the vehicle's history while Marcus stood beside her with his arms crossed, inspecting every detail. This one has 120,000 miles, but the previous owner kept up with all the maintenance. New tires 6 months ago, brakes are good, engine runs smooth. It is not fancy, but it will get you where you need to go. Marcus walked around the car slowly, checking the body for rust, looking under the hood, testing the doors and windows. Finally, he nodded. This is a good one. Fair price too. Sarah looked at the price tag, $4,800. With the money from the bikers and what she had managed to save from tips, she could afford it outright with a little left over. No monthly payments, no debt hanging over her head. Just a reliable car that was completely hers. 30 minutes later, Sarah was signing paperwork in the dealership office while Emma played with Marcus's keys, fascinated by the way they jangled when she shook them. When the salesman handed Sarah the keys to the Honda, her hand trembled. She had not owned a car in over a year. The freedom it represented felt almost overwhelming. Marcus followed her back to the diner, his motorcycle rumbling behind her modest sedan. When they pulled into the parking lot, Linda and several of the other staff members came outside to see the car. They cheered and took pictures, and Emma clapped her hands with delight at all the attention. That night, Sarah drove herself and Emma home for the first time. It was less than a mile, a journey that took 3 minutes instead of 20. But as she pulled up in front of the hardware store and turned off the engine, she sat there for a moment in the darkness, overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in just a few months. From homeless and desperate to employed and stable. From walking in the dark with a baby to driving her own car. From being invisible to being seen, valued, supported. She looked back at Emma, who had fallen asleep in the car seat Sarah had bought that afternoon. Another gift from the bikers, along with the bass that clicked into the back seat. Her daughter looked peaceful, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath, completely unaware of how close they had come to losing everything. We made it, baby girl. We really made it. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. Sarah woke up early and looked at the small artificial tree she had bought at a discount store. It stood in the corner of the apartment, decorated with cheap ornaments and a string of lights. Under it were 3 wrapped presents, a set of stacking cups for Emma, a warm winter coat Sarah had found at the thrift store, and a book of recipes Linda had given her. It was not much compared to the Christmases Sarah remembered from her childhood, when her mother would fill the living room with presents and cook elaborate meals. But it was theirs, earned through hard work and resilience. Emma woke up and immediately crawled toward the tree, fascinated by the lights. Sarah scooped her up and held her close, breathing in that sweet baby smell that never got old. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Mama loves you so much. There was a knock at the door. Sarah frowned, confused about who would be visiting this early on Christmas morning. She opened it to find Marcus standing there with a large bag in his hands. Morning. Hope I am not interrupting. Not at all. Come in. Marcus stepped inside, looking around the small apartment. His expression was approving, taking in the cleanliness, the organized space, the evidence of a life being rebuilt piece by piece. Wanted to drop this off before the club's Christmas ride. He handed her the bag. It is from all of us. Sarah opened it carefully. Inside was a thick envelope and several wrapped packages. The envelope contained cards from different members of the Iron Brotherhood, most of them simple but heartfelt. Keep fighting. You inspire us. Merry Christmas to you and Emma. But there was also $500 in cash, tucked inside a card from Marcus that simply said, "For emergencies. Every parent needs a cushion." The wrapped packages contained clothes for Emma, practical things like warm pajamas, socks, and a winter snowsuit. There was also a stuffed motorcycle that made Emma squeal with delight when Sarah showed it to her. "This is too much. You all have already done so much." Marcus shook his head. "It is Christmas. Let people be kind to you. You have earned it." After Marcus left, Sarah sat on the floor with Emma and let her daughter tear into the wrapping paper with abandon. The little girl was more interested in the paper than the actual gifts, laughing as she crinkled it in her tiny fists. Linda called around noon and invited them to Christmas dinner at her house. Sarah accepted gratefully, and that evening she drove to Linda's home. A modest ranch house on the edge of town decorated with so many Christmas lights it could probably be seen from space. The house was full of people, noise, laughter, and the smell of roasting turkey. Linda's family welcomed Sarah and Emma like they had always been part of the group. The grandchildren played with Emma, passing her around and making her giggle. Linda's husband carved the turkey while telling his terrible jokes. Linda's daughters set the table and shared stories about their own struggles as young mothers. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah felt like she belonged somewhere. As winter turned to spring, Sarah's life continued to stabilize and grow. She was promoted to shift supervisor at the diner, which came with a small raise and more responsibility. She opened a savings account at the local bank and started depositing $20 from every paycheck, watching the balance slowly climb. Linda connected her with a woman who ran a small in-home daycare, and Sarah enrolled Emma there for the hours she worked. It cost money, but it was worth it to know her daughter was being cared for properly and was around other children her age. The Iron Brotherhood continued to be regular customers, though the dynamic had shifted. They no longer treated Sarah like a charity case or someone to be pitied. They treated her like one of their own, teasing her about her coffee-making skills, asking about Emma's milestones, including her in their conversations. Even Jake eventually came around. One Saturday morning in April, he approached Sarah's station and waited until she was free. When she came over to take his order, he did not look at her, focusing instead on the menu he had probably memorized years ago. "Look, I was a jerk. Back when we first met and after. I said things I should not have said. Made assumptions I had no right to make. I am sorry." Sarah was so surprised she almost dropped her notepad. She studied Jake's face, looking for signs of insincerity, but all she saw was genuine discomfort and remorse. "I appreciate that. Thank you." Jake nodded and finally met her eyes. "Marcus told me about my own story, about how his dad left and his mama struggled to keep them fed. Said I of all people should know better than to judge someone for being down on their luck. He was right. I was taking my own stuff out on you, and that was not fair." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had been carrying for months without realizing it. "We all have our stories. I get it." Jake ordered breakfast, left a generous tip, and from that day forward treated Sarah with the same respect he showed everyone else. It was a small thing, but it mattered. It closed a wound that Sarah had not even realized was still bleeding. By summer, Sarah had saved enough money to buy Emma proper furniture. A real toddler bed to replace the crib, a small bookshelf for the growing collection of books Linda kept bringing, a toy chest for all the stuffed animals and blocks that seemed to multiply on their own. She also enrolled in an online community college course, just one class to start, Introduction to Business Management. It met twice a week in the evenings, and Linda adjusted Sarah's schedule so she could attend. It was the first step toward something bigger, a future Sarah was beginning to believe might actually be possible. One evening in late August, Sarah was closing up the diner after the dinner shift when Marcus came in. The restaurant was empty, chairs already stacked on tables, floors mopped and gleaming. "You got a minute?" "Always. Want some coffee?" Marcus nodded, and Sarah poured them both cups. They sat at the counter in the quiet restaurant, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator in the back. I have been thinking about that day you came up to us at Pete's shop. Marcus stared into his coffee. You were so scared, but you did it anyway. Asked for work when most people would have just stuck out their hand and begged. That took courage. Sarah shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I did not have a choice. Emma needed me to be brave. We always have a choice. You could have given up, gone to a shelter, given Emma to foster care, disappeared into the system. Nobody would have blamed you, but you did not. You fought, and you are still fighting. He pulled something out of his pocket and slid it across the counter. It was a patch, the kind that bikers wore on their vests. This one was different from the one Sarah had seen before, smaller, simpler. It showed a single star with the words, Iron Heart, embroidered beneath it. The club voted. We want to make you an honorary member. Iron Heart means you are part of our family. It means if you ever need anything, you call us. It means we got your back, always. Sarah picked up the patch, running her fingers over the embroidery. Her vision blurred with tears she did not try to hide. I do not know what to say. Say you will keep fighting. Say you will keep showing Emma that no matter how hard life gets, you do not quit. That is all we ask. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Marcus finished his coffee, dropped a 20 on the counter for a cup that cost $2, and headed for the door. Before he left, he turned back one more time. You did good, kid. Real good. 3 years later, Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her small but tidy 2-bedroom apartment, adjusting the collar of her button-up shirt. Through the open door of the second bedroom, she could see Emma, now 4 years old, sitting on her bed in her preschool uniform, carefully putting on her own shoes. The little girl's tongue stuck out in concentration as she worked the Velcro straps. Mama, I did it. Look. Sarah walked into the room and knelt down, inspecting Emma's handiwork. Both shoes were on the correct feet, straps properly fastened. She pulled her daughter into a hug. Perfect job, baby. You are getting so good at this. Emma beamed with pride, her dark curls bouncing as she hopped off the bed. Can we have pancakes for breakfast? Not today, sweetheart. We have that early meeting, remember? But we can stop at the diner and get some before I drop you at school. Emma's face lit up. At Miss Linda's. Sarah smiled. Yes, at Miss Linda's. The apartment they lived in now was on the second floor of a renovated building on the better side of town. 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen with a full-sized refrigerator and a stove that worked properly. A living room with a couch Sarah had bought new. Not from a thrift store, not from someone's curb, but actually new from a furniture store. The walls were painted a warm yellow, and Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator and much of the hallway. Sarah's silver Honda sat in the parking lot below, still running strong after 3 years of faithful service. Next to it was a small herb garden Sarah had started on the balcony, basil, rosemary, and mint growing in terracotta pots. They drove to Thompson's family restaurant through the familiar streets of Ridgemont. The town had not changed much, but Sarah's relationship to it had transformed completely. She was no longer the desperate stranger who had stumbled in with nothing. She was a member of the community now, someone people recognized and greeted by name. The diner was already bustling when they arrived. Linda looked up from the register and smiled when she saw them. There are my favorite girls. Emma, you want the usual? Yes, please. Chocolate chip pancakes. Sarah shook her head fondly. One of these days you are going to try something different. Why would I when chocolate chip pancakes are perfect? Linda laughed and called the order back to the kitchen. She poured Sarah a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. So today is the big day, huh? The presentation. Sarah felt nervous butterflies flutter in her stomach. Yeah. Board meeting at 10. I have been practicing all week, but I still feel like I might throw up. You are going to do great. You always do. Over the past 3 years, Sarah had not only kept her job at the diner, but had also completed her associate's degree in business management. She had taken classes online, and at the community college, studying late into the night after Emma went to bed, writing papers during her breaks at work, somehow managing to maintain excellent grades while working full-time and raising a child alone. 6 months ago, Linda had announced her intention to retire. At 63, she wanted to spend more time with her grandchildren and less time on her feet for 10 hours a day. She had offered to sell the diner to Sarah at a price far below market value, with a payment plan that actually felt achievable. Sarah had applied for a small business loan through a program specifically designed for women entrepreneurs. Today was the day she would present her business plan to the loan committee. If approved, she would become the owner of Thompson's Family Restaurant. The idea still felt surreal. Emma finished her pancakes, getting chocolate and syrup all over her face in the process. Sarah cleaned her up with wet napkins, kissed her forehead, and drove her to the preschool attached to the Methodist church 3 blocks away. Miss Rachel, Emma's teacher, greeted them at the door. Emma ran inside without looking back, already calling out to her friends. Sarah watched her daughter disappear into the classroom, feeling that familiar mixture of pride and melancholy that came with watching your child grow more independent every day. The bank was downtown, a sturdy brick building that had been there since the 1950s. Sarah parked out front and sat in her car for a moment, gathering her courage. Her business plan was in a leather portfolio on the passenger seat, another recent purchase that had felt simultaneously professional and indulgent. She thought about that day 3 years ago when she had approached the Iron Brotherhood with nothing but desperation and a baby in her arms. She thought about Marcus's words, "What matters now is what you choose next." She had chosen to fight, and she was still fighting. Sarah grabbed her portfolio and walked into the bank. The presentation lasted 45 minutes. She showed the loan committee her financial projections, her plans for updating the menu while maintaining the diner's classic appeal, her marketing strategy for attracting younger customers without alienating the regulars who had been coming for decades. She talked about her experience, her education, her vision for the future. When she finished, the committee members asked questions. Sarah answered each one with confidence, drawing on 3 years of hands-on experience running shifts, managing staff, and handling everything from inventory to customer complaints. Finally, the committee chair, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, closed her folder and looked at Sarah directly. "Miss Mitchell, I have to say, this is one of the most thorough business plans we have seen in quite some time. Your financials are realistic, your strategy is sound, and your track record speaks for itself. We will need to review everything formally, but I think I can safely say you should expect good news within the week." Sarah felt like she might float right out of her chair. She managed to keep her composure, thanking the committee professionally, but as soon as she was back in her car, she burst into tears. They were not tears of sadness or fear or desperation. They were tears of triumph, of disbelief, of overwhelming gratitude for how far she had come. She called Marcus immediately. They said yes. They said they need to review formally, but the chair basically said, "I am approved." On the other end of the line, she could hear Marcus's smile. "Told you. Never doubted you for a second." That Saturday, the Iron Brotherhood threw a celebration at the diner. They took over the entire restaurant for the evening, and what was supposed to be a small gathering turned into a full-blown party. Current employees came, former employees came, regular customers came. Even Jake showed up with his wife and 2 kids, shaking Sarah's hand and congratulating her sincerely. Linda presented Sarah with a framed photo of the diner from the day it first opened in 1967, along with the original menu and a handwritten note from the founder. "You are not just buying a business. You are becoming a steward of something special. Take care of it and it will take care of you." Emma ran around the restaurant with the other children, high on sugar and excitement, occasionally running up to Sarah to announce some new discovery or show off a drawing one of the bikers had helped her make. As the party wound down and people started heading home, Marcus pulled Sarah aside. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small box, handing it to her. "Open it." Inside was a keychain with a small silver motorcycle charm and an engraved plate that read, "She believed she could, so she did. It is from all of us, to remind you of where you started and how far you have come." Sarah hugged him tightly, this rough biker who had changed her life with one simple act of kindness 3 years ago. "Thank you for everything, for giving me a chance when nobody else would." Marcus pulled back and looked at her seriously. "You gave yourself the chance. I just pointed you in the right direction. Everything else, all of this, that was all you. 6 months later, Sarah officially became the owner of Thompson's Family Restaurant. She kept the name, kept most of the menu, and kept all of the staff who wanted to stay. But she also added new items, updated the decor slightly to feel more modern while maintaining its classic charm, and implemented new systems she had learned about in her business classes. The restaurant thrived. Regular customers remained loyal, and new customers started coming in, attracted by Sarah's social media presence and the warm, welcoming atmosphere she cultivated. Emma started kindergarten, thriving in school and making friends easily. She told everyone who would listen that her mama owned a restaurant, pride radiating from her small frame. Sarah enrolled her in dance classes and swimming lessons, things she never could have afforded in those early desperate days. On the 1-year anniversary of Sarah taking ownership of the diner, she stood behind the counter during the morning rush and looked around at the bustling restaurant. Every table was full. The staff moved efficiently through their routines. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. Through the kitchen window, she could see her cooks working in perfect synchronization. This was hers. She had built this through sheer determination, hard work, and the kindness of people who had believed in her when she barely believed in herself. The door chimed, and Marcus walked in with several other members of the Iron Brotherhood. They had been coming every Saturday morning for years now, and Sarah suspected they always would. It had become tradition as reliable as the sunrise. Morning, boss lady. The usual. Sarah poured their coffee with a smile. Coming right up. As she worked, she thought about the scared, desperate young woman who had stood in a parking lot 3 years ago, holding her baby and asking to wash motorcycles for $10 each. She thought about every humiliation, every setback, every moment when giving up would have been easier than continuing. But she had not given up. She had fought, and she had won. That evening, after closing up the restaurant and picking up Emma from the after-school program, Sarah drove home through the familiar streets of Ridgemont. Emma chattered about her day, something about finger painting and story time, and a boy named Connor who had shared his crackers with her at snack time. Sarah listened, making appropriate responses, but part of her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the future, about the possibilities that seemed endless now. Maybe she would open a second location someday. Maybe she would write a cookbook featuring the diner's most popular recipes. Maybe she would start a mentorship program for other single mothers trying to build better lives. The possibilities stretched out before her like an open road. Back at their apartment, Sarah helped Emma with her bath and bedtime routine. As she tucked her daughter into bed, Emma looked up at her with those big brown eyes that still melted Sarah's heart every single time. "Mama, are you happy?" Sarah smiled, brushing Emma's curls back from her forehead. "Yes, baby. I am very happy." "Good. Me too." After Emma fell asleep, Sarah walked out onto the balcony and looked at the town spread out below her. Lights twinkled in windows. Cars passed on distant streets. Somewhere out there, Marcus and the Iron Brotherhood were probably at someone's house, working on bikes and telling stories. Linda was probably tucking her grandchildren into bed. The night shift staff at the diner were cleaning up and preparing for tomorrow. And Sarah was here, in her own apartment, with her sleeping daughter and her successful business and a future that looked brighter than she ever could have imagined. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app, scrolling back to that list she had made 3 years ago. Almost everything was checked off now. The goals that had seemed impossible then were accomplished facts now. She added one final item to the list. Remember to help others the way I was helped. Then she closed the app and went inside, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring.